A single top gladiator could cost 15,000 sesterces, roughly 20 years of a Roman soldier's wages. For that money, you could buy a working farm, and the farm could not bleed to death on a Tuesday afternoon. So here is the question almost nobody asks about the arena. Not how did they die? We've all seen how they died, or we think we have. The thumb, the sand, the crowd. No, the real question, the one the Romans themselves lost sleep over, is quieter and colder than that. How much did he cost, and who ate the loss when he died? Because in the year 177, the price of these men had climbed so high that the Roman Senate passed a law to cap it. Not a law about war, not about grain. A law about the going rate for people who kill each other in front of a crowd, because the cost was driving wealthy men into ruin. That inscription still survives. Hold that in your head, because it breaks the whole picture. If a gladiator was just a slave, just a body to be used up and thrown away, he would have been cheap. Bodies were cheap. Rome was drowning in bodies. He wasn't cheap. And the reason he wasn't cheap is the reason almost everything you've been told about the arena is upside down. Here is the paradox we're going to take apart. On the sand, a gladiator was a man about to die. In the ledger, he was one of the most expensive, most carefully protected assets a Roman could own, an investment you fed, trained, insured, and did not, under any circumstances, want to lose cheaply. Those two things are true at the same time, and the gap between them, between the body and the balance sheet, is where the real history lives. So we're going to do something the poems and the films never do. We're going to follow the money. We'll price him at the moment of purchase, raw, untested, worth almost nothing. We'll watch that price climb through years of training, feeding, and medicine, every sesterces of it spent by a man betting on his survival. We'll see how he generated revenue, who actually collected it, and what happened to all that invested capital in the single second a blade found the gap. And somewhere in the middle, the whole thing is going to turn over. Because the deepest truth about a gladiator's price is that it was never really about the gladiator at all. 3 men could walk out of that arena. The champion, who fought his way to freedom. The corpse, whose owner filed a claim. And the man who never set foot on the sand and kept nearly all the money. By the end, you'll know which one the system was actually built for. Let's start where he started. At auction. Forget the hero for a moment. Forget the six-pack and the speech to the crowd. Picture a man standing in a slave market, and picture the buyer walking a slow circle around him. He is not admiring courage. He is reading a body the way a farmer reads livestock. Shoulders reach the width of the wrists, how the man carries his own weight. Old injuries, teeth, temperament, because a fighter who panics is worthless, and a fighter who won't stop is dangerous to own. This is the first thing to understand, and it is not comfortable. The majority of gladiators did not choose this. They were slaves, prisoners of war, condemned criminals, men whose bodies had already been made into property before they ever saw a training school. What the buyer was pricing was not a career. It was raw material. And raw material was cheap. An untested man, a novice, no record, no name, no proof he wouldn't freeze. The first time steel came at him could change hands for around 1,000 sesterces. Real money to an ordinary family, but pocket change against what he might become. At that price, he was a bet, a lottery ticket with a pulse, because the buyer wasn't paying for what stood in front of him. He was paying for a possibility, the possibility that this raw, terrified man could be turned over years and at great expense into something the crowd would pay to see and other owners would pay to borrow. That transformation was the entire industry. It had a name. The man who ran it was called a lanista, and his training school, his ludus, was not a prison so much as a factory. Its raw input was cheap, frightened human beings. Its finished product was a fighter worth 15 times as much. And like any factory, it lived and died on one number, the cost of turning the first into the second. So let's actually count it. Say you've made the purchase, 1,000 sesterces, gone. As of this moment, you own a man who cannot yet fight, cannot yet earn, and can very easily die of something stupid before he's worth anything at all. Congratulations, you've bought a liability that eats. Because the purchase price is the smallest number in this whole story. It's the deposit, not the mortgage. From the second that man walks through the gate of your school, he begins to cost you every single day, and none of that spending has bought you a single denarius back yet. He needs to be housed. In a barracks, you maintain. He needs guards. Because he is both valuable and, quite reasonably, would prefer to escape. He needs to be fed, and not scraps will get to exactly what, because the food alone tells you how the Romans saw him. He needs equipment and armored practice gear, and the constant attention of trainers who themselves cost money. If he gets sick, you pay a doctor, because a dead investment heals no one's finances. And here is the part that makes an owner sweat. All of this runs for years, before the man is ready to be shown. A raw recruit was not thrown to a champion the following weekend. He was a project measured in seasons trained, conditioned, and slowly, carefully brought up to a standard, while the bills came in daily and the revenue stayed at zero. There's a rhythm to this that anyone who has ever run a business will feel in their stomach. Revenue rare, expenses daily. He earns on the handful of days matched. He costs you on all the others, which means every recruit was a race. Could you carry him, feed him, house him, heal him, train him long enough and skillfully enough to reach the day he finally paid you back before the sheer accumulated weight of keeping him alive sank the whole bet? Most of that weight, it turns out, went into one place. Not the walls, not the guards, into the body itself, keeping it fueled, keeping it healed, keeping it worth more tomorrow than it was today. That's where the real money went. So that's where we go next. Start with the food, because the food is where the illusion cracks first. We picture gladiators as carnivores, slabs of muscle built on slabs of meat. The bodies say otherwise. When archaeologists examined the bones from a gladiator cemetery at Ephesus, the chemistry told a consistent story. A diet built overwhelmingly on grains and beans, barley, wheat, plant protein. So consistent, so known, that the Romans had a nickname for these men. They called them hordearii, the barley eaters. And that isn't neglect, that's design. A diet that heavy in carbohydrate does something specific to a body. It lays down a layer of fat over the muscle. On a fighter, that fat is armor. A shallow slash that would open an artery on a lean man instead opens a bleeding, spectacular, and survivable flesh wound. The crowd sees blood. The owner keeps his asset. The very shape of a gladiator's body was engineered to make him profitable to injure and expensive to actually kill. The bones said something else, too. The chemistry pointed to something the ancient texts had described, and modern scholars had doubted: a tonic made from plant ash, rich in calcium, apparently drunk to strengthen bone and speed healing after training. A sports supplement, a recovery drink, 2,000 years early. Sit with what that means. Somebody was costing out the calcium intake of men they intended to send into lethal combat, not out of kindness, but because a fighter with strong, fast-healing bones stayed in service longer and returned to the sand sooner. Even his skeleton was being maintained like plant and equipment. This is the beat where the money actually lived, not the purchase, the upkeep. Years of food, years of a trainer's time, years of medical attention, and Roman arena medicine was genuinely advanced, precisely because the patients were too valuable to lose. The physician Galen, before he was physician to emperors, sharpened his craft treating the wounds of gladiators. The best trauma care in the ancient world was lavished on slaves, because those particular slaves were worth more repaired than replaced. Every one of those choices points the same direction. Feed him to survive shallow wounds. Dose him to heal fast. Doctor him to return to duty. train him for years so the crowd would pay to watch him and other owners would pay to borrow him. Each decision quietly added to his price. The frightened 1,000 sesterces recruit was being slowly, deliberately built into a fighter who might command 10 or 15 times that an appreciating asset carried on the books of a man who needed him to keep breathing long enough to earn it back. Which raises the obvious question, earn it back how? Here is where the machine finally pays. The single richest way to earn from a gladiator was one an owner never even had to gamble on his death. You could rent him out, a magistrate, a politician, a rich man staging games to win a crowd's love needed fighters, and he did not want to buy and maintain a whole school to get them. So he came to you, the man who already had. And the terms of that rental are the most revealing document in this entire history, because they were written to protect the asset from the crowd's appetite, return him alive at the end of the day, and the sponsor paid a fee, a manageable rental. But if the sponsor allowed him to be killed, the price changed completely. Now the sponsor owed the owner the fighter's full replacement value, the whole capital sum, years of feeding and training and medicine, invoiced in a single afternoon. Read that again, because it dismantles the myth entirely. Death in the arena was not the default. Death was the expensive option, a penalty clause. The crowd wanted blood. The owner wanted his investment back in one piece, and the contract sat between them like a pressure valve. It is the coldest, clearest evidence we have that the men who ran this world were doing arithmetic, not bloodlust. Then there was reputation. A gladiator who won, and won again, and survived long enough to be recognized, became something rarer than a fighter. He became a draw, a name on a poster, a face the crowd came specifically to see. And a fighter people paid to see was a fighter other owners paid a premium to rent. A fighter whose every appearance advertised the school that produced him. Skill wasn't just survival. Skill was compounding value. And the fighter himself? He saw a sliver. A victor might take a modest cash prize in the pricing of that same era. A winner's purse could be as little as a few dozen sesterces against a man valued in the thousands. He might, over years, save enough to matter. But understand the ratio. The man generated a fortune in rental fees, gate appeal, and asset appreciation, and the man collected almost none of it. Which brings us to the turn. Because if the fighter did the bleeding and the owner kept the money, then the obvious question is the one the whole episode has been walking toward. Who was this business actually for? Here is the flip. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. A gladiator was never priced as a man. He was priced as a position in someone else's portfolio, and nearly everything that gave him value was owned by other people. Look again at where the money actually came from. Not from him. From the school that trained him years of accumulated expertise he didn't own. From the rental market that borrowed him demand created by politicians who needed a crowd's affection. Not by anything the fighter chose. From the scarcity of genuinely skilled survivors, a scarcity manufactured by the very lethality that killed off the competition. From the reputation the crowd handed him value created in other people's minds, that he could not sell, could not keep, and could not walk away with. He was the object at the center of all of it, and the owner of none of it. That's the machine. The fighter was the visible business, the body, the blood, the name on the poster. But the real business was the structure standing behind him. The Lannista's school, the rental contracts, the sponsors buying popularity, the whole apparatus that turned a cheap, frightened human being into a tradable, appreciating, insurable instrument. He was the stock. Other men owned the exchange. And this is where the arithmetic stops being clever and starts being monstrous, because we should be honest about the limit of the asset language we've been using. Calling a man an asset is not a neutral description. It was a Roman choice, and it required first taking a person, stripping his ownership of his own body, and handing that ownership to someone else. Every elegant number in this story, the purchase price, the upkeep, the replacement value, the appreciation, sits on top of that theft. The economics are real. But the economics are not the excuse. They are the mechanism by which the theft was made profitable, orderly, and routine. So when a Roman looked at a gladiator and saw 15,000 sesterces, that number was never measuring the man. It was measuring everything that had been done to him, and everything that could still be extracted from him by people who would keep the profit whether he lived or died. Which leaves one entry left on the books. The most expensive one. What happened to all that invested capital the day it stopped breathing? Every asset has a final line in the ledger. For a gladiator, it had a face. Let's be precise about the risk, because the truth is stranger than the myth. Studying combat records from the 1st century, the historian Georges Ville found that roughly 19 of 100 bouts ended in a death, which works out to something like a 1 in 10 chance for any given fighter in any given match. Not a suicide mission. A dangerous profession, priced accordingly. And the average age in the graves was around 27. That number 1 in 10 is the whole economic model in a single fraction. It's low enough that an owner could reasonably expect to keep earning off a fighter across many appearances. It's high enough that every appearance carried a real, calculable chance of writing the entire investment off in one afternoon. Survivable enough to be worth the bet. Lethal enough to keep the crowd honest. But hold that estimate loosely, because it did not stay fixed. The evidence suggests that by the 3rd century the odds turned darker. Some reconstructions put a fighter's chance of dying closer to 1 in 3, even 1 in 2. The historians argue over the exact figures. And they should. The records are thin. But the direction is clear, and the direction is the point. Over time, the machine grew hungrier, and it consumed the men inside it faster. And now, the pronoun has to change. Because up to this point, I've asked you to stand in the owner's place to count his costs, weigh his bets, read his ledger, but the ledger's final entry is not an abstraction, and you don't get to watch it from the stands. A man is on the sand. He is around 27 years old. He was bought for 1,000 and built into something worth 15 times, that fed to survive, dosed to heal, doctored to return, trained for years by people who needed him alive for reasons that had nothing to do with him. And in the space of a single second, a blade finds the one gap all of it was designed to protect. For his owner, this is depreciation, a capital loss, a claim to file if the fighter was rented, an empty barracks bed if he wasn't. The investment written off. For the man, it is the end of a life that was taken from him twice. Once when his body was made into property, and once when that property was used up. The Romans built an entire, sophisticated financial world on top of that moment. Elegant contracts, careful nutrition, advanced medicine, insurance against loss. All of it, in the end, machinery for extracting the maximum value from a human being before he was discarded. The account book balances. That is exactly the horror of it. So how much did a gladiator cost? Enough to bankrupt the men who bought them. Enough for the Senate to legislate a ceiling. Enough that killing one was a penalty clause, not a spectacle. He was 1,000 sesterces gamble, built into a 15,000 sesterces instrument, fed like livestock and healed like treasure, generating fortunes he would never touch, a man priced as a position, in a portfolio he did not own. But hold both truths at once, because that is the only honest way to end this. The economics were brilliant. The economics were obscene. Rome did not fail to see the humanity in these men. Rome saw it clearly, measured it precisely, and put a price on it anyway. That is not a failure of arithmetic. It is what arithmetic looks like when a person becomes a line on a balance sheet. He was worth 15,000 sesterces. And the tragedy is not that the number was too low. It's that there was a number at all. If you want to know how deep that habit runs, how routinely history has looked at a human being and written down a figure, then stay with this channel. Because next time, we price someone the Romans thought was worth even more and paid for in a currency far stranger than silver. But that is a cost for another day.